Started.
Started.
Going.
It.
Live. The world is watching. Millions of people.
This definitely false.
The future is at hand.
You are incorrect. 100%.
uh, do we have people? I mean, person? Qualify that a little bit.
Uh, no.
No, yeah, that's all
Zero.
right.
Well, they got, give them some time.
I was just, I was the other day. I was bemoaning I was talking to Andrea on the porch, and I was bemoaning how I wish I was really good at something that people were actually interested in. Like
Yeah.
I was like, I fell down the rabbit hole the other day of like naval aviators, like flying these cool planes and like Top Gun and Danger Zone plane, and it's awesome. And anytime somebody like that walks in the room, everyone's like, "Oh, tell me about what it's like on the aircraft carrier and what it's like to," and then they talk and everyone's like, "Wow, that's amazing." And then for me, it's like you walk in the room, people are like, "Oh, what do you do for work?" I'm like, I know computers really well. Oh, tell me about that. And then I start talking, and eyes glaze and disinterest immediately spawns. And then people are like, "Oh, okay, okay, can you fix my printer?" That's always the question, right? The
No,
meme of the
no, I cannot.
question.
I cannot fix your printer.
To which my answer is, I can get a baseball bat. We could take it out to the field. We can have a therapy session with it,
No,
and
just
maybe you
get
can
a
get
new
a
one.
new one.
Get a laser
Yeah,
jet. You'll
get
be
something
happier when
easier.
you're all done.
Yeah. I still don't understand why printer drivers are of the devil, but maybe that's a mystery that no academic will
Well,
ever
perhaps
conceptualize.
printing is one of the hardest problems.
And I know in computing, like it is such a difficult thing. And I don't what's funny is for human, and this just highlights sort of the discrepancies between machines, computers, and humans. Like some things are super easy for us, and well, everything is a lot of different things are easy for us as humans. Like for instance, looking through some sort of a paragraph and picking out some information, right? It's a piece of cake for us. Computers, you have to have like these explicit, discrete steps on how to do literally absolutely everything. And
Yeah, but it also took you, you know,
a while to learn to
eight
read.
years to learn how to read,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Plus, you have like needs and wants, and your body, it
right. But
has,
it, but
sleeping and learning. Like
right,
your brain is built to learn.
right.
Like,
But a computer. What's funny is a computer technically isn't built to learn.
yeah, I know.
Yeah, and that's what's. I mean, we as humans, being the learners, teach computers. Well, no, we don't even teach computers. We tell computers how to learn, and then through sort of
Yeah, but
probabilistic
they're not
distribution
even
of
learning.
data.
Like
No,
they're
they're not learning.
this is
It's
not learning. It's
no, it's just statistics. It's like big grand applied statistics at the very large level
yeah,
because it can
and
only learn.
they're terrible
Yeah,
at it, right? Like they just
right, right. Well, it's
um
like it's like um.
I think if you had a different processor, right? If you
Mhm.
emulated, if you took the brain and said let's build in hardware a neuron, right? And
Mm,
like you'd get much closer to it. But then you'd also have to implement some sort of system of it being a baby, right? And learning
right,
what things are like.
right.
There are so many challenges with that, right? Okay, we're gonna build, eyes, but like your eyes are actually complicated, right? Your brain actually sees the image upside down, right?
Right.
And sort of translates it. You have stereo vision, you have this ability to focus. Like, I mean, that's just
Hmm.
like the sort of the hardware level. So I think there's a lot of really difficult pieces inside of that
Yeah.
we
Not
sort
to,
of
not to even mention the genetic programming that you come default with. Right. Like there's a lot of intuitive things that like if you're looking at wildlife, like a horse just can walk right away. As soon as it's born, it sort of can do certain animals can do certain things, right? Like breathing is an innate, it's like an automatic sort of a thing. The heartbeat is an automatic sort of
yeah,
thing.
but
There are
I mean, some of those are just sort of your your systems, right? Sort of are built for that. But I don't think that's like necessary for learning. Like those I don't.
Well, what I was getting at is, say a horse is just born and it can walk. Well, that's a very difficult problem to learn, right? So like humans, for instance, we take, a year or two to learn how to walk, right? That's something that our brains actually have to take some time to figure out. And then even going back to the eye thing, like the eyes themselves, I mean, I think it's assumed that, like babies kind of just see colors and there's not a lot of correlation. But as you get a little older, you begin to actually be able to understand what it is you're seeing and track objects and do all that kind of stuff. So the question is, say a horse doesn't have to learn how to walk, they just know. How does that knowledge get transferred from mom horse to baby
Yeah,
horse?
it's not. That's not knowledge, right? That's just
Right. It's programming. It's sort of
ability.
like machine learning, right? Like
Yeah.
we give it like we just explicitly provide this hard coded, you can do this. Like it doesn't actually, like, how does a computer know how to learn? Well, we actually tell it. Like we just give it the explicit, it's just coded. It's sort of hard coded into who they are. And so, for a horse, for instance, like the walking thing, which is a hard problem to solve, to learn how to walk, for a horse, it's like OP. They just know how, because it's such a fundamental part of what they
Yeah, but
are.
yeah, you're saying, well, computers are idiots, but horses, they just know how to walk. Well, it took them how many million years to learn how to walk?
Right.
Like
Well, and
humans.
what I was getting at is the genetic info. Like, where is that information stored? Where is the knowledge to walk coming out of your mother's womb? Where is that stored? Like, how does that transfer?
I think a lot of that is sort of stored in the feedback loops that are built in and the systems. Like, if you think about your heart beating, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you literally have super very fine control, like limited control over your heart rate. Like your heart just
Right.
goes up
Yeah.
and goes down.
Right. Right. You can
But
control what you're
there is a
doing to
system
control
in
the
your
heart rate.
body, right,
Right.
that like sends out a pulse
Mm-hmm.
periodically
Mm-hmm.
that does that. So I think there are some built in
Yeah.
things,
It's like BIOS. Yeah. It's like
but I
hard
think
coded.
I think some of that is necessary. Not all of it is, right? Like a computer doesn't need
Right.
to know how to walk. Like I don't think that's gonna have to
Well, it kind
learn.
of depends on who you're talking to, because some people are like, ooh, we could have robots that walk and do these sorts of things. It doesn't have
Yeah,
to.
but I
Like
think I
you're
think
you're
we
right.
have
You're
to
like
walk in
explicitly
learning in
right,
teaching computers how to learn before we can teach them
right,
how to walk.
right,
Um,
right,
but
right.
I think if you look at sort of the learning loop, I think that I think if you had different hardware, right, and if you had these sort of, you know, for a computer, maybe it would be, you know, you've got a capacitor and you want it to be full, and when it's not full, right,
Hmm.
you desire it to be full, and you know there are right physical characteristics that you could sort of bake
Right,
in
right,
to make it have, because I think you got to have to learn. I think you have to have a desire or a will to do it. Like I
right,
look at birds, right? Like we have
right,
some in the front, we have some baby birds, right? And like they just know that they are hungry, and
right. And they
and
go
and you
and they
look at the
eat.
desire of a bird, or the
Right.
intuition is to make more birds, and that's it. Like
Hmm.
go eat,
Hmm.
make more birds. You know
Yeah.
that's their
What's
whole goal in
interesting,
life.
I like the desire bit, because you can even put that on humans. Like you and I are both teachers, right? There are some humans that are good at learning and have zero desire to learn.
Yeah.
And because they have zero desire to learn, doesn't matter how good or bad they are, they don't,
So I was
right?
just talking to somebody about it. Was actually yesterday. About how, so I was talking with the men's basketball coach, the new one,
Hmm.
and he said all day he would take some kid who is
A hard worker wants to
mid
learn. Yep.
ability, high, not phenomenal, that wants to work any day of the
Hmm.
week over somebody who
Hmm.
is super talented, right? You also, right, when you talk about sports, you get, they care about metrics, like how many points did I
Right.
score, and how much, that sort of ties into what they're gonna their earning potential if they're thinking about it. But like,
Right.
I look at myself and you know, I got a 23 on my ACT because I
Mm.
didn't study for it, and I didn't
Yeah. You didn't work at it.
wasn't
Didn't care.
I didn't really I
Yeah.
got a high enough score to get into college, and I but you
Yeah.
look at my GPA at like every level, and it went up. I mean,
Hmm.
other than my first semester, which notoriously was terrible, but like super terrible.
That's like your first semester at UNK
Oh
was
yeah.
super horrible.
Did I not? Have you not heard
You
that story?
never regaled me of that.
So when I took so I had 5 classes. I'm
Okay, so
pretty
you went
sure.
15 hours straight up.
So I had English, Calc, 3 other classes. Well, a computer class. I think I had either econ. I think I had econ.
Econ.
I remember econ was an 8 o'clock class,
Was it
and
5 hours or was it just three? Do you
I
remember?
think it
Was it
was
every
3.
day? Just three. Okay.
Yeah,
But
but
it
I
was an
think
8 o'clock
Calc
class.
was
So
5. So maybe I only
yeah,
had four
Calc was.
classes.
Yeah, Calc is always five.
So I had two 8 o'clock classes: my programming class and my econ, and then I had
Oh,
English and and English and calculus. And
right.
English, I did not like the teacher, so I did pretty terrible in the class. I was not
Right.
surprised that I got a D in that class. But calculus, I think I had a B,
Right.
and I took the final and I just bombed it. So I got a D in that too.
Oh,
So
man.
I think I had two B's and two D's. So my GPA was something like 2.25, right? And you go home
Wow.
when your high school GPA, was a 3.5,
Right.
and you have a 2.25, and you're like, my parents are wondering, like,
What
is he
happened to
even
you?
gonna make it?
Right. What did you do?
But then every other class I took, I got an A or a B in, right? So my
Right.
GPA just slowly.
Slowly went up. Yeah.
So I think I
Because
ended up
you,
with like a 3.667, something like that.
so as you were going through, you learned to love learning, or did you always love learning?
Well, I did like learning, but I think it helped that like so when I would do it, I would do a program and I would like want to finish it. Like I just want to go and solve it, right? And so I'd solve it, and then I'd have people who didn't understand it on the same floor as me or whatever, and they'd be like, "So, how'd
Right.
you do that?" And I would like go and help them, and it was really easy to help them because we were at sort of the same level, right? Like
Right. Right.
I'm teaching you, but like it's not like
We're at the
I'm
same level.
30 levels
Yes.
ahead of you,
Yes. Yeah.
which then coming back and teaching was quite difficult because
Right.
I assumed everybody was like me and they like enjoyed it, and
New.
that was clearly not the case
No, it's not. It's not the,
at all.
to me, it's always interesting to me to follow the trajectory of people who end up sort of, at least at some point in their life, teaching, because it's kind of it's odd. Like it was hard for me. I didn't ever want to be a teacher. Like I didn't want to do that. I didn't ever want to be
I
a
mean,
teacher.
I wanted to be a programmer
You
till I
mean,
got
yeah,
to
me too.
college.
Yeah. And here's the kicker for me is my first like actual job where I made money was a private lesson instructor.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah, you
so
were
I
teaching
screeded,
guitar, right?
yeah, I screeded sand for a while. No, actually, I was teaching trombone. Like the
Oh,
first thing that I did was I was teaching trombone lessons my freshman year in high school. And then I went and I got a job at True Value. And so then obviously I discovered I also love like hardware and gadgets and crap like that, which are also fun. But it was teaching. So then I taught trombone lessons. Then I picked up the guitar, picked up the bass. Then I started teaching guitar and bass lessons on the side. And that eventually led to me actually getting the full time gig at the music store teaching guitar, bass, guitar of various flavors and bass lessons. And I teach what 30 a week. It was absolutely insane. And I would only do it on Fridays and Saturdays. So like it was a lot. And after I did that for 4 years, and what's funny is after I got done with that, if you would have asked me like, "Hey, you going to teach again?" I would have told you unequivocally, without a doubt, not a flinch in my body. No, absolutely not. I will never ever teach again. And it's just really interesting. Like I was gifted at it. I did a good job, but I didn't ever put two and two together. Like maybe this is something that you could actually do with your life. And I think the reason why is whenever you do one on one, you get to see your students and your own failures way more acutely. So, for instance, on a Friday, I'd go to work at 8 a.m. and I teach classes, or I teach half-hour lessons all the way until 6. And my first two or three would be students that did literally nothing over the week. Nothing. And I'd sit there and basically it was just 30 minutes of practice. We were just practicing the same crap over and over and over again. And I would, I'd get the intermittent one that had worked, and then we actually learned something new, and then go back to the same monotonous practice, 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 practice. So after those 4 years, I was just like, I don't want to. This is ridiculous. I hate this. It's so monotonous. It's so mind-numbingly horrible, right? Because it was sort of a one-on-one. When you get into more of a class type of a situation, you learn new, or you're teaching new stuff every single class period. And if you didn't take the time to practice, well, I guess that's too bad for you, right? That's maybe you'll learn quickly because we're just going to keep moving forward. But, and this kind of actually touches on what you were talking about with the conversation you were having with the basketball coach. I taught probably over 150 different students through those 4 years. I have three that ended up doing, like, one was in the Chicago Philharmonic, one went up to the like New York Philharmonic, something like that, and then I had another one that did something big. They were all bass players. Well, I had one guitar player, and the other two were bass players. And guess what? They were not the most talented. They were marginally talented at best, but they worked their butts off. And so I'd get them in there, I'd show them some, they'd go home, they'd play all of the other 6 days that they were not with me. They'd come in and I'd run them through what they did the last week. They'd nail it. We learned new stuff, new stuff. Those are also the students that so quickly ascended above my ability that I had to send them off, So those are also the students that I think I spent 2 years, the longest was 2 years with one of them, because they became better than me so much faster because they were working so hard.
Did you find that you are like that when it came to programming? Did you feel that you went and did it outside of class?
Yes.
Or
Yes. 100%. And that's what I try to tell students nowadays. When I was programming, so when I was with you guys, like my first real programming class was a Sharam, and he was a hard teacher. Very, 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 very hard teacher. Not a lot of students liked him, but I love him so much because he gave me such a good foundation. Like he was the old school, write it with a pencil and paper, write the code. We were writing Java on tests, no computers. But here's how I did it. I'd go in
definitely a benefit to writing stuff versus, I don't know if you remember,
versus typing.
I ended up doing like you could have, if you took a test, you could have one page where you could write. I think I did different sizes, but like I think in my intro class it was like one page, front and back. That's it, or front. I don't remember what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you want to write.
Right.
And honestly, right, the kids who did it probably didn't need it. Right.
Most
of them, but the fact of writing it down.
Yep.
You literally you remember it.
Yeah. Anyway. Well, and you have to pay more attention to the syntax. You can't rely on, text highlighting to fix all your mistakes for you, right? Yeah. Like if you go into an IDE, so for Java, for instance, strongly typed, pretty syntactically heavy. Sure, you can go in, use like IntelliJ or whatever IDE you want to use, and it'll kind of help you out. It'll help you out a bunch, actually. For us, we didn't have that opportunity. It was like if I was going to write a function or a for loop or something, I had to know exactly how it was ordered, exactly what symbols and bits and bobs were put into it. And I couldn't have this sort of crutch of, hey, by the way, you missed your semicolon, which, everybody does in Java, but you couldn't have that, right? To properly format the code structures and to properly format the instructions was extremely beneficial, right? So, but here's how I did it. I would go to class, Sharam would teach us stuff. And for the most part, he actually wrote on the board. He didn't actually write on a computer a lot, but he would teach us stuff. And as soon as I left, I usually had like an hour or two between my next class. I would literally go straight to the library and I would just write code for like 2 straight hours on the stuff that we just learned. Like for instance, when I took object oriented with Sherry, like it was, I wanted to be good at it, So when she would teach us something, I would go again straight to the library and I would sit there and I would write objects after objects after objects after objects, as far down and as deep and nested as I possibly could. Obviously, it was all throwaway. It was all junk. It was nothing useful,
Yeah.
but it was that repetition that actually ingrained in me that I knew it. Now, again, if we're going back to machine learning, in order for a machine to learn the current way we have it, they have to have that repetition, like a few million times at the very least. But at the same time, yes, it was because I was extremely willing. I was extremely willing to work very, very hard, and I
Yeah, but
think
so
that's
and
where.
the so I spent a lot of time, in my PhD, right, thinking about
Mhm,
things like, when you talk about goals and knowledge, and what's the difference between, say, knowledge and information,
mhm,
like
mhm, mhm.
how do you differentiate them, right? And knowledge is different in that you have that sort of context associated with,
Right.
if I see a word, right, I know, what it means, but there's also this sort of, humans have this innate drive or goal of, like, if I tell you what a chair is or a microphone,
Right.
right, you have the, what is it, Pluton Plutonian, or I don't remember what, the, like, this is what a mic is, right?
Was it Socratic or
Yeah, maybe
Plato?
it's Socratic, like one
It's
of those,
it
right?
might be it's either Platonic or Socratic. I
Yeah.
don't know which one it is, but
But
yes,
you
yeah,
have
yeah, yeah.
the, like, okay, this is the ideal screwdriver, right?
Yes, you have it in your head what that thing
But, like,
is.
what does that really mean? Because, like,
Right.
you've ever heard the thing about the ship? So if you
Yes, yeah, changing all the parts out. When
change all
does
the
it become
parts
a
of
new
the
ship?
ship, like, at one
Right, which
point
is
is
you
it the
and
new
me.
ship?
All the cells sloughing off our body repeatedly. Are we still the same person, even though we're?
So, but we have this,
Yeah.
like, sort of innate, um, capability to look at something and say, okay, I see, like, if you're driving, I see on a sign on the road. I know that has, the top part is a piece of metal,
Right.
and there's a screw. But, like, okay, if that was welded on, is that still one piece of metal, or is that two pieces of metal? Like, we have this
Right.
notion of, there are things in the world, and we kind of think we know how they're made up, right? And
Right.
computers have, like, no. I mean,
Innate knowledge of any
it's
of
like
that.
when people talk about, you know the whole, when ChatGPT came out, right, and they were arguing, well, it's thinking this or it's thinking that. I'm like, no,
No, it's
you're
not.
giving it
It's
an
literally
input
not.
and it's producing an output that looks like what a human would say,
Yeah,
and you're
it's
assigning.
literally just using statistical probability, like probabilistic distributions of whatever your input data set was to produce some sort of a human-ish output.
Well, yeah, and it's
Like a lot of
producing
people,
the next word, and then based on the next
yes,
word, it's producing with
the
the
next word.
context, right?
Yep.
It's
And
like,
what's interesting, I mean, because they did add, I mean, like there is like syntactical context and stuff that are sort of figured into that kind of stuff, but at the same time, it doesn't know what it's saying. It's sort of like the Turing test, right? Like the old thought experiment of, hey, I don't speak Russian. I don't speak a lick of Russian, Matt, at all. Okay. So native if I have a native Russian speaker that is going to, try to talk to me in Russian, I could have a book and I could look literally everything up and I could try to understand everything that's being said. And I might be able to actually reason out what the sentence is, but do I know Russian? No, I don't know Russian, right? I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just using some resources to sort of glean what it means, right? There's a big
well, yeah,
difference
but you
between.
also don't like, you know I'm sure you've read the Bible as well, but, like,
Yep. Oh
the
yeah.
differences in the translations and the different,
Hmm.
you can write a word in the translation, but, like, does that give you the full context of what that
Right.
word means in there?
Right.
So
Well,
I,
just
I think a lot of that is lost.
yeah. Well, it's just like the context of love. Like love is something that is talked about a lot, especially in the Bible. In Greek, there's a boatload of different
Well, there's like
words.
four words for love, right?
Yes,
And
that fit love, right? That have very different, like phileo versus the agape, right? Like one of them sort of like brotherly love. It's sort of like
yeah,
friend love, right?
yep,
The agape is sort of the unconditional love. It's the unwavering, no matter what you do, I'm going to love you kind of a thing. For us in English, If you're going to translate that directly over, it's going to say, God loves you, or it would say,
I
with
love
love from your
cherries or
brother.
whatever it
Yeah,
is.
with love from your brother Paul, or I love pie, right? Like in English, those three things are very different connotatively. Like if we think about the context of, God loves me versus I love my brother versus I love pie, like those
Versus
are
I
three
love
very
my
different
wife.
levels of, or I love my wife, right?
Yeah.
Like they're very different levels of love, but English, because of the language we're speaking in, is restrictive in that way, right?
Yeah.
And so even then, like a computer, when we say that it has learned something or to learn something or that it is learning or that it produced an output because it learned, no,
Well, but I
not
also,
really.
one of the things I've thought about, people ask, does XYZ pass the Turing test? And I'm like, well,
Right.
I think the answer is actually yes, but the
Yeah, I think
question
you're
I
right.
guess is, was it the right test to begin with?
Right. Right.
And I think it's not, right? Because I think the actual Turing test would relate to, you know, given it has to be able to learn about
Right.
something. I think that's actually more
Right.
important than it parroting
What is already
English.
known. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I think Chat GPT is great. I think these models are going to be super useful. They're not
Right.
going to get worse. But I think until you have a generalized one that can learn how to learn,
Right.
right now
Right.
you've got, and we're opening up all these cans of worms that we don't have any solutions for. Like,
Right.
how do you
Right.
how do you encode in it what values are?
Right. What is right? What's wrong? Right. Well,
Like,
even
right to one
sentiment and
person is wrong to another, and like you
right.
can't
Right.
like. I think there's a thing that was like there's literally nothing we can agree on. Like, not everybody
No.
loves ice cream or pizza or
No. No.
nothing.
Not everybody loves their spouse. Not everybody loves anything, right?
There's
Like,
literally nothing. Like, if you can't get
yes,
people to agree on pizza, like
you can't get people to
there's
agree on
nothing.
anything. If you can't get them to agree on ice cream, which is the absolute good, right? Well, and I love this train of thought because it's very philosophical. I had in one of my PhD classes, it was just last semester. We were working on our pre-proposals, and we had this one student. He wanted to create a misinformation, disinformation, artificial intelligence. So like this AI would detect misinformation and disinformation, which sounds cool. It's neat, right? But the issue is what is true for one person is not true for another person because there's so much contextual now. Like for instance, if I witness a car
Even if it
crash,
was literally right that.
yes,
So if you have two people
right,
who are literally like one is doing something to the other,
right, yes,
you can have completely different perspectives on it, and they both are
on what it
probably
was.
right.
Right. That is absolutely correct. But from one perspective, the other person is wrong. And from the other perspective, the other person is wrong. Okay. So,
I mean, some
like,
of it is you will remember different things, right? So if
right,
if I come up and slap you, right? Like
right,
for me, it's like, well, my hand hurt. For you,
right,
it's like your face hurt, right? Like
right.
we have completely different
Well, and to me, like
memory
in
of what
general,
happened.
his perspective was to do it in regards to say news, right? Because we're trying to figure out because the internet is one of those cans of worms that we're dealing with. Like what is true? What is believable? What is something that we can put faith in? These questions that are big philosophical questions that are good. These are things we should be asking. But the problem with news is news should recount events, and events themselves, depending on your perspective, can be remembered differently. Like for instance, a car crash. Okay, if I'm looking at the car crash from this angle and you're looking at it from another angle, we can see very, very, very different causes of that car crash, right? So if I'm a
Yeah,
news writer
yeah,
and I write it from this angle where I see this information, and you write it from that angle where you see that information, you are telling the truth from everything that you know. And I am telling the truth from everything I know. But from my perspective, you are a liar. And from your perspective, I'm a liar, right? So we got into this deep philosophical conversation, and he was like, well, we're just going to have to create an accurate I mean, it was in the labeled data set, right? Because he needs a data set, right? This is true. This is false.
Yeah,
This
but
is
see,
true.
I think he's actually missing what you should do. Is
Right.
I think actually, if you want to, like, I think the solution to disinformation is that, in some part, is that you actually have to have trusted sources, right? And the
You
problem is
actually,
that
yes.
there is no,
Yeah.
like, nobody has a list at this point, right? Like, I feel
Right.
like, honestly, right, if you took the top 100 newspapers in the U.S., right, you could
Yeah.
probably consider those to be trusted. But like online, how do you tell the difference between, the Denver Post and the Colorado
Right.
Post when one is fake and one is real? Like, you can't.
Right. Well,
When
and
you see it
ultimately, even
online and if it looks exactly the same, how are you ever going to
right.
know?
Well, and even then, even in those newspapers, you have different writers, and different writers, some are more
Yeah,
apt.
I'm not, but
Yeah.
I'm,
And there's
part
a
of it is
but
there's so much information. I think it becomes
right.
intractable in the sense that
Right.
you have no sense of,
Right.
like, I have no idea what newspapers are in Denver. I can
Right.
tell you about the Pawnee Republican. I know that's a
Right.
newspaper, right? And we could argue about, what
The
does
writers
XYZ
there.
article
Yeah.
mean,
Right.
or how is this an opinion piece, or how is this,
Right.
a news story, and how do, the facts can differ, right?
Right.
How does
Right.
the weight of
Right.
those facts differ? You
Right.
know,
Well, and what is remembered by the different individuals involved in those facts,
and you're
right? Which
assuming they're
is
not lying.
and you're also assuming they're not like there's so many variables. Like we have entire trials, court trials, just attempting to discern the facts of a very simple event. And so, unless we're willing to go to trial for every single event that every single newspaper is going to report upon, we cannot trust what is said because it may be that the person interviewed somebody and remembered certain things or wrote certain things down, but didn't remember other things and didn't remember write certain things down. So it could be, so that's the error on the side of the journalist. But then there's also the person being interviewed. Like, what did they remember? What did they say? And so now you have like this twofold problem of is the information getting corrupted from jump to jump to jump, right? From person to person to person, which it does. It innately does, right? Because humans remember certain things and don't remember certain things. They have an aptitude to like they have, in psychology, we create a framework for the world around us and then we view the world through that framework. It is an unavoidable reality, right? And so different individuals see realities this way, some see them this way, and that is the proverbial you're on that intersection in the crash, and I am on this intersection in the crash, and they're on that intersection in the crash, and we all see these realities very, very, very different. And that's where, the whole disinformation, misinformation, you're right. Like, I think it's just we don't have trusted sources, but every source is a human and every human cannot be trusted. And so it's really difficult to how do we actually get, and are we going to say that then maybe computers have to be the source, but then computers have to be programmed by humans and humans can't be trusted, right? So like it's the reason why, and actually this was referenced in the work that he was working on, and I got to give him huge kudos for this. It's the reason why philosophers hate to try to talk about it because it is innately a human problem. It is I mean, it's something that, Socrates asked, what is truth? Guess what? Nobody's actually answered that. It's like we as an academic or scientific community are like, we figured out what truth is. Right? There it's
Well, I mean,
so difficult.
I mean, I think part of the problem with academia is there is not, at the moment, right? There is not an incentive for people to redo
Right.
experiments for
Right.
verification. I've long
Right.
complained about this because you sit there and look and say, well, I think it'd actually be worthwhile to take an experiment that's already been done and actually do it again. Like,
Replicate well,
I don't.
replication studies are like spat on.
I
It's like,
know.
oh, good
I
job.
know.
You just copied somebody else.
But
It's like,
like,
no,
shouldn't that
yeah,
actually be,
what we're
like,
doing.
if you were taking a junior faculty,
Yep. Yep.
wouldn't that be the best? Like,
Yep. Yep. Well, see, to
that should be your
me,
first 5 years, is like,
when I
go take experiments and do them.
when I think of science, which is this big debate we have nowadays, I think if someone is going, it's like let's talk about Einstein, his theory of relativity. he made these postulations about how the speed of light works, relativity, blah blah blah. You know, everybody sort of understands that. You know, space time, this kind of idea. How many replication studies? Everybody was like, no, 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 no. This totally flies in the face of everything we've ever done. And so everybody took his numbers and went back home and replicated it and replicated it and replicated it. And they could not disprove what it is that he said. So if you think about the work he did was maybe 1% of the effort that actually brought general relativity into use in modern physics.
Yeah,
And
him or
and what's
Newton or
yeah,
whoever,
Newton,
like,
anybody, right? And so I think in modern academia, though, replication studies, like you have to do something new and interesting, otherwise it's not going to get published. And so
well,
replication
they're also
studies,
trying to solve. They're actually solving for a different problem. Like they're
right,
not
right.
solving for science, like which
No,
is
no, no.
unfortunate. They're
Yes,
solving for how do I tell if I have 10 atoms, like how do I tell which one is the best,
the
right?
better one, right?
The
It's
and the
metrics.
reason I
It's
want
all metrics,
reason I want the best is because I want that one to stay around, and I want
right,
him to go get grants, and
right.
either be famous or make
Draw
us money
students,
through grants or
yeah,
be a philanthropist towards our university.
right,
You
right.
know,
Yeah, it all became production. It's a matter of productivity now. Like it's not a matter of quality over quantity anymore. It's a matter of quantity over quality because and I've often asked that question because to me I think it would be more important to take 10 years to produce a paper that has extremely powerful meaning than it would be to produce two papers a year for 10 years. Right? Because if you produce two papers a year for 10 years, the likelihood that those things mean anything is very low. Very, very, very low, right? Because it takes time to work through especially complicated problems. And I think the reason why we're not seeing massive changes or developments in science like we did, say, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, is because that time is not given to academics. They cannot do it. You cannot spend 10 years on a single study. You will get fired. Like it's just the reality of the situation. And that's a problem because what's happening is we're producing a bunch of crap and we're not actually producing any meaningful information.
yeah. I mean,
And that's
I think there are exceptions to that, but yeah, I think
there
that's
are there are obviously there are exceptions,
I
but
think if
currently
you
that's a
look
bit
at
that's kind of the
some
rule.
brilliant professor that's at Princeton, and Princeton wants to keep them, right? They will
Right.
clearly,
But that's kind of the exception. It's not
yeah,
really the rule, right?
yeah,
And that's a problem because then we're not really solving problems. Because here's the thing. Here's imagine I came up with, let's say I invented the first optical transistor. I won't because I'm too stupid, but let's say I invented the first truly optical transistor that actually uses photons to control photons, which I kind of think is impossible, but whatever. Okay. I would really, really like for people to take that idea and test it a million different times, replication study, so that I know I'm not just crazy. Because that means it actually means something as opposed to, hey, I made this cool novel idea. Just believe, trust me, bro, it's cool. Right. Like, and
so
that's kind
you're
of what
going
it
for the
is.
Nobel Prize,
Right. Like,
not the
yeah.
piles of money.
No, yeah. And so to me, the replication studies are extremely important. I think it should be like 1 to 99. I think there's for every one cool new idea, there should be 99 replications to validate it. Because what ends up happening is then, and this is something Dostoevsky, like going back to philosophy, one of his biggest issues with academia was just that, was the fact that academics have these ideas in their ivory towers, but there's no verification or validation that the ideas are actually meaningful in the context of reality.
Yeah,
And there's no testing, there's no replication, there's nothing meaning. They just come up with these ideas, write these papers. Everybody's like, oh, cool, that sounds nifty. You're super cool. I want to pay you and keep you around. Awesome, neato, nifty, cool. The issue is most of those ideas are just junk. Like they're not good. And where I've come across this is I think this is every PhD going through their PhD studies. You read so many stinking academic papers. We read so many papers. Your brain just wants to blow up and pop out the
see,
back of your head after a
that's
while.
why I always just read the. Okay, let me read the. Okay, what's
The
your
abstract.
problem? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Like
You literally
I
took the words out
filter,
of my mouth. Yeah.
right?
Well, then why the, after reading a bunch of them, I realized that like 90% of every single academic paper is pointless.
Yeah.
90, unless you're going to do replication, but nobody does replication, right?
Well, and if you're going to, I remember I did quite a bit on the review of, okay, what other literature is in the world? Like, am I being crazy?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is my thing different than everything else?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Is my thing garbage? Probably.
Right.
Um,
Which
like,
is most of the things that, yeah. But
which is actually funny because I remember I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was talking to my group, and I was saying, yeah, it's funny that like in 2010 when I started, or 2009 when I started working on my thesis, it was like, imagine a world where AI actually does something useful.
right
Was the thought versus
was the
now
thought.
when
Right.
we have machine learning and
We
generative
have two
AI.
scale AI applications. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So like that was, assume that this is true. Like
Right.
it would probably be trivial then for it to do the things that I wanted it to do, but you know, that was, the world then versus the world now.
Well, see,
Much
to me,
different.
doctoral thesis, and I'm a noob, so I have to qualify this. I am such a noob. I don't know anything. I'm so green. It's ridiculous. So every single seasoned PhD that ever watches this, you can just shut your ears off because you know, I'm new. But to me, it seems like the PhD, the dissertation, the thesis itself is like my kindergarten project. Like I have never done real research before, right? Like a really big research project before. I've never, never, ever done that. Generally, I think the doctoral thesis is your first big research, right? It's the first prolonged, extensive effort at making research. Now, there are some exceptions to this reality that actually do amazing research in their doctoral thesis. There's some. I would be very surprised. It's my belief that most doctoral theses are just kind of not worth a lot, right? Like they may have a cool question. I will say that there may be some really really neat questions that are being sort of probed in these, but I think the research itself and probably the artifacts produced by the research themselves are generally in most cases worthless. I mean, looking at my thesis, like I've got a cool problem. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be neat. But I think at the end of the day, such a noob that I am probably going to produce something that a seasoned researcher would go, okay, that looks like a doctoral thesis. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But there's so much pressure put on students, PhD students, to produce a Nobel-winning doctoral thesis.
I I
Like,
I actually don't think there's any pressure. Like I don't think I
I have
ever felt
felt,
that.
I have felt a significant amount in my PhD studies, and I don't understand it. And maybe I
Like,
don't,
is it
I
coming
don't
from
get
your
it.
professors?
Yes, yeah, and I
Well,
don't
I
I
would. My
don't.
advice would be, don't
Yeah,
worry
no,
about what they're saying.
I
Like, who
don't, I
cares?
don't. Yeah, whatever.
Like,
Because I know the truth.
there's actually one person you got to appease, and that is your major professor.
Yep,
And
yep,
if
and he's
and
awesome. So
the
I'm
way you should do that is that should be like, okay, you gotta agree with me on the problem, and we gotta agree on a plan of how we're gonna get it done.
right,
And as long as you appease them, right, they should bring you up to the board
right, right,
when you are ready, and they are ready for you to be ready.
right,
I think
right,
that's really the gist of it. And if you do
right,
that, I think the other committee members understand what the game is, right? And like
right,
they're not
right. And that's where, see,
they're
here's the
serving
thing,
because
like,
then they get some kudos on their CV.
and this
Um,
this what's interesting to me is this is again a matter of perspective because I talked to some other PhDs in my cohort and they fundamentally disagree with everything that you've just said. But
that's because they don't know
me,
how it actually works, but that's okay.
but me and my cohort, and maybe it's because I'm not really surrounded. I'm surrounded by, and I don't know, maybe it's just because I came from the country. I don't know. I'm surrounded by PhDs that generally are just like, hey, here's the reality of the situation. I know it kind of stinks, maybe, but this is the truth. Like it's just how it is. And maybe some of these other PhD cohorts don't have that kind of people around them. Just because I do think there are times where there are research supervisors that are actually more inclined to keep their students in the rat race than get them out of it because they're producing work for free ish, right? Like, why would I want to graduate a PhD student if they're producing a boatload of publications for me?
But I mean that honestly should be a question that you like you should actually interview your
Your supervisor.
PhD advisor, right? Like
Yeah. Yep.
it should,
Yep.
and if you don't like them, do not stay
Hmm.
with them. Like, and if you look
I.
at their track
Yep.
record and it says that,
Yep.
like, hey, how long is, what are your PhD students? And then go talk to them. Like, I think,
Yep. And don't be afraid to
I
jump
made the
ship.
mistake
Yeah.
of sort of doing that where I didn't have a goal, right? And my friend, he had a goal and he was done with his PhD 4 years earlier than me.
Yeah.
He
And
had a
that's.
professor that went through and,
Yep.
said, okay, here's the project. Here's what you need to do.
Yep.
He did it in 18 months and was gone.
Yep.
Right.
And
He was,
that's my intention. And I have a fantastic advisor. He's fantastic.
yeah.
But there are a lot of residual connections that I have that are more. Now again, my advisor, he's way more practical. Like he came out of industry, um, and there's a little bit less of the academic mindset in him, where it's like you have to redo all of your research over and over and over again and make it perfect before you're ready for defense, right? Like,
Yeah.
which to me, again, like looking back at the perspective of this is my first research project ever. Of course, it's not going to be perfect. Of course, it's not really going to be that
Yeah,
great,
I
right?
learned tons of things when I did my master's thesis, right? Like,
Right.
don't use Microsoft Word, but that's a
No,
whole nother.
I actually learned that from you. Was it you? It was you and Sherry actually that got me into LaTeX or LaTeX or latex or whatever you want to call it. I hear it so many different ways, but and I love it because I'm a coder and it's like writing stuff in code and I like that.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that is infuriating is like, where the frick is my figure gonna go? But that's
Right, right. It's such a gamble. Like, hey,
here.
let's
Put it
run it and
here.
see where it
Put
ends
it
up. Right
here. No, here.
here, no, here, no. I got to move it
Next
here. No,
page.
move it here.
Previous page.
Yeah,
Whatever.
yeah. But I do love it, and it's so like it's such a great way to put things together. Like I've not used um any sort of a word processor to write any sort of anything
Yeah, but when
official.
you get into back into being if you get to be a professor, you
Then I
have to
write
use
everything
Word.
in. Oh yeah, well everything for classes that I write is all in Word, 100%.
Yeah.
But anything like official publication-y kind of, or like if I'm doing an investigation or like a expert witness or whatever, that's all in LaTeX, right? And I use Overleaf because it's decentralized. I can access it from anywhere. Super super convenient. Um, which is just online LaTeX is what it is. But yeah, those are the things that do drive me crazy because I actually as a PhD I've had some such good mentors, and this is where I just have to kind of count myself lucky. I have actually had some of just talk because I talked to all my different PhD cohort. I have had one of the most remarkable PhD journeys ever just for the fact that I've had such incredible mentors through the process. And I think it may and I don't know why. I have no idea why. I don't know if it's because I came out of sort of a rural environment. I don't know what it was. I have no idea what caused that. I don't know whether it was because I brought in some world experience, some real world experience to the process. I don't have a clue.
Well,
But my
I
story
think
is
that actually is a thing, right? So I think
right.
people who have like right in an ideal world, right? Like you actually should great, you can be a teacher, right? You should teach for 20
Hmm.
years and then get your PhD to say that you
You did it.
have done whatever. But
Right.
that's not how academia works, right? It's
Right.
you got a lot of kids that are you know, bachelor's, master's, PhD so they can go and teach and then, become a full professor at some point in their life. And I think when you think about a PhD, it means you are a doctor of philosophy.
Right.
Like I probably haven't mastered philosophy until like I understand that I've mastered it now.
Right.
Right? I understand when I look at a system, okay, these are good points, these are bad points.
Right.
Every object oriented versus functional versus procedural, right?
Right.
They all have their benefits, their
Yep.
downfalls. There is no silver bullet. Like, I understand all of that.
Right.
And you don't have that if you aren't living life and
Yep.
working and
The
like,
School of Hard Knocks. Yeah.
oh, yeah. I learned way
Yeah.
more working in a company about databases than I did
Yeah.
in my database class, other than
Yeah.
what the normal forms are, and then realizing that like nobody cares about fifth, right? It's only like two or whatever. Like,
Right. Nobody cares about going that far. Yeah, and that was like for me, and I was so appreciative of like my master's studies that got me so involved with the Department of Defense. Because otherwise, you sort of just, I don't know, just assume that everything you're getting in class is relevant to industry. And that's one of the things that I want to try to do the best that I can is making sure that what I'm teaching actually means something in the real world. Right. And I think it's really easy for academia to get very disconnected from the reality that surrounds them. Right. Like we talk about ideas and the industry talks about applications, but in academia, application is almost frowned upon. It's like, oh, you didn't do a theory paper, you did an application paper. Oh, like that's not valuable. Right. And
yeah,
and honestly, like theory is only meaningful in that it produces useful applications, but it's not really the way that academics think about it. We think about, oh, I present I created a theoretical paper. Okay, cool. What does that apply to? Does that mean anything? Does it provide anything useful? Oh, it's theoretical. So I got it in a big journal. It's theoretical. Okay, cool. Kudos. Is that going to help anybody at all?
yeah,
And you can tell the real meaningful papers, like the MapReduce paper that Google came out with years ago that now we use, right? Like it was heavily theoretical in that you can take any sort of a query and you can reduce it to two sort of functions, map, reduce, right? And you can do these big computations using this. That theory was only useful in that you could actually apply it to do big data analytics. It was only useful in that way. And so there's so many theory papers that go nowhere. Like, oh, you get all these kudos for this theory. What are you going to use it for? Like, what in the world is that going to apply to? And there's a bit of a look down your nose because maybe I'm coming from the engineering side of things, where it's like, for instance, in mathematics, like there's pure mathematics, and that's cool. And then there is the use of mathematics
yeah,
and then which is sort of like physics. Like there's a lot of physics, and then you can go even further than that. Applying physics is engineering, right? So engineering is sort of mathematics. Like physics is applied mathematics, and engineering is applied physics. And to me, engineering is meaningful because through engineering, all of the new technological marvels, quote unquote, that we have developed. Right? It's engineers that create all our spaceships and all our computers and all of our buildings and all of our cool things. But there is, and I've sensed this just in now this is anecdotal, so this is just my experience, but there's sort of this condescending opinion of engineering among academics. Like, oh, they just build stuff and they're not figuring out anything new, which is stupid because they are. But, I don't think that theory is useful whenever it can't be applied, right? Now, that I have to like add a little bit to that too, because sometimes someone comes up with a theory that's so stinking ahead of its time that it can't be applied for another, say, 10 to 20
yeah,
years.
yeah,
Like some of the machine learning stuff that came out in the 80s, or some of even like in the 60s. But there was just no hardware available that could ever facilitate an empirical study on that, right? Like there's no way they could build anything. But to me, that's one of the qualms I have with academia is like, well, building something is like stupid, and I don't like that. I think building stuff is meaningful, and I think engineering
well, and
things is
also
meaningful.
like honestly, right? Teaching is meaningful. Like you don't have to do
Hmm.
like I think you would almost be better in a lot of areas to have somebody who is practicing blah 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 than somebody who is writing papers about it,
Right.
because your practicing
Right.
person will get to see things.
Yeah. In the
Um,
real world, in the wild, right, as they unfold before you. Yeah, and that's to me why again, I'm really passionate about trying to keep in touch with the industry side of what it is that we do. You
yeah,
know, otherwise we just become irrelevant. And everybody's like, well, you need to be reading papers to stay relevant. Okay, kind of, maybe. I mean, yeah, you got to read some papers. You do need to stay apprised of what's going on in the academic world. But if you're not out there talking to actual coders, actual cybersecurity people, actual IT people, how in the world are you going to know what to teach your students so that they actually go to their job and know what they're doing? Because I think
yeah,
that happens a lot with students coming out of the university experience is they get to their first job and they're like, and their employers and themselves are like, what in the world did you even learn? Like,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and
I
yeah,
always felt it was, we were making a, if you're an audio engineer, right?
uh-huh.
We're like laying the baseline, right?
Yep, laying the foundation. Yep,
And that gives you the,
ability to learn
yeah, the
better and
template,
faster.
right? To
Yep,
say, okay, I know you understand what a data structure is and big O notation and
right,
procedural programming and what
right.
syntax. Like I know you have all of those, but you know, the assumption that they're going to come in and they're going to be like hit the floor
Good at
running.
it.
Like you're going to have
Right.
some of those kids, but like a lot of it, you just have to bring them up to speed.
Well, for me, it's even less in the information that we teach them, the knowledge that they acquire, and it's more in the learning how to learn.
Well, I think there's a quote like 90% of being great at something is showing up, or
Yep,
something like that.
that's it. Yep,
Like
that's
the
it.
people that are going to show up and um, put in the work, right? That's
Right.
part of the university, and you can't
Yep.
like,
Did you? By the way, I don't remember. Did you keep attendance when you were teaching
um, some of the time, I think it
okay
depended on the class.
the class? Right. If it's like
Um,
a freshman level
I really
class,
hated doing
keeping
attendance.
attendance.
Like, so when I was at Dakota State, they had they had a thing about so if you were on like a VA scholarship, like if you attended class but failed it, that was different than if you stopped attending it, right? They would get different amounts of money back. So I'd have to fill out a stinking
Right.
sheet saying when was the last time they did anything.
Yeah.
I mean, so that
Yeah.
was annoying. I mean, I honestly hated keeping attendance, but I also hated kids that missed. So I was
Yeah.
kind of both
The
sides.
perpetual missers. Yeah, for me, I do. I definitely keep attendance, it took me a while to get to that because I was like, well, if you go work a job, they're going to keep track of your attendance. And if the I want to lay a baseline because my and maybe I'm weird, but my goal for our students is that they are going to be employable, right? Which I think is what you were getting at. Is like, are they employable? Can they learn?
Yeah.
Can they show up? Do they know how to take a shower? Do they know, like these sort of it seems silly, but it's not because finding good employees is hard. It is hard. And so I started enforcing attendance and everybody'd say, we're grown-ups now. You don't need to do this kind of stuff. And I was like, well, when you go out to your job, you just go ahead and skip work whenever you want to. And we'll see how that works for you. They're like, well,
Yeah.
but this is university. I'm not working yet. You know what the university is for? It is so that you
This is
learn
this is actually
how to.
one of your jobs.
This is one of your jobs, like just showing up, and I try to mentor the students as much as I can. Like it is true. A large majority of the success in your life is predicated on very, very simply showing up. That's all you got to do. Just show up. I call them butt points. I'm like, put your butt in the seat and you get points. Like it's so simple. But it can be difficult just because, again, as a college student, you were forced to go to high school and now you're like, I'm an adult. I can do whatever
Yeah,
I
but it's
want,
so much easier. You have so much more free time on your hands. Go to
I know it
college,
is. I know. It's so much easier.
and then you
So
go
much
to your
easier.
PhD, and like by the last semester, you're taking 9 credits of research, and like
Yeah. Not
I'm not
doing a
even
lot.
going to class. I'm
Right.
spending a couple hours. I'd go to the coffee shop and spend several hours writing, and
Yep.
I'd go to work.
Yep. And that's it. Yep. That's kind of where I am now for my PhD stuff, it's a few hours a day and then I'm working mostly, which I mean, honestly, going back to the teaching thing, I love teaching. And it wasn't until I got to university that I found out that I love teaching. Now, when I was in audio engineering, when I was at the conservatory, I did tons of teaching but I was with the students, right? So they'd always come to me and say, "Hey, Adam, why does this mean?" And I explained it to the best they could, which is sort of the Feynman method, like, are you actually good at something if you can't teach it, sort of thing. And Richard Feynman was a pretty big advocate of if you want to learn something, learn it as if you're going to teach somebody and try to teach somebody, and if they can get it, that means you know it,
But see,
kind
I
of a
don't.
thing.
The other day, I was having a chat with basketball people, and I said, I'm pretty sure that two things are true. One is that Michael Jordan was a better basketball player than Steve Kerr. Right?
Mhm.
That's one thing. The second one is that Steve Kerr almost undoubtedly would be a better basketball coach than Michael Jordan.
Than Michael Jordan, right?
Because Michael Jordan had talent. Like, he can't tell you how to
How to
jump high.
dunk. Yeah, like to do what he did.
You know,
Like the style
he
points on
can't.
his dunks.
It's
Yeah.
not. You do not have that ability, and so you
Right.
cannot do it. Whereas Steve Kerr, he had to shoot his 3-point shot how many
Gazillion times.
million
right.
times or whatever the
Yeah.
number is, right? To be good at
Right.
it. How many
Right.
times did he have to shoot? Right? So he, by the way he worked, is going to be good at the teaching part as opposed to Michael
Mm.
Jordan, who is better at the basketball part.
The doing part, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting because it almost seems like that's sort of the rule exception thing again. The exception is Michael Jordan. There are those
I
people,
think it actually applies to all people who are sort of sit at that
right?
top
That level,
1%.
yeah, and
Top
it's very,
10th of 1%.
yeah. When I would even think, I would say if you expand it to the population of the world, I would say there are some people that are so stankin' good at doing because they're just intuitively good at it that yeah, they can't teach
I
you.
mean, if you picked out who is the best guitar player,
And I
in
would say
your
they are
opinion,
the best. I would
who
say
is
the
it?
best of the best of the best. Oh my gosh, don't ask that question. That's hard.
Like, pick
Uh,
one. It doesn't have to be the
um,
number one. Actually don't care because I don't know.
Best guitar player.
Like, there's probably somebody from ZZ Top or
There's Eddie Van
Let-
Halen. There's Steve Vai. There's Joe Satriani. There's
yeah. Do you think they would be a good teacher?
actually all three of those are good teachers. So I've looked at their instruction videos, and they actually are pretty good teachers. I'm trying to think of any players that were bad teachers. Like Flea was a good teacher. Victor Wooten, these are bass players. Victor Wooten was a good teacher.
Well, but I also wonder if
The
if
bad
you're
teachers
looking
just
at
didn't make any,
if
any
you're looking
teaching
at
instruction.
teaching materials, right? Like,
Right.
did they do that on their own, or did they have
Were they
somebody
prompted?
help them?
Right.
Right. I think that's why kind of.
And I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know
That's
that.
why I think
may-
coaching
yeah.
is like you can sort of see it, right? In the
Right.
like I can't just release a video and say or a series and say this is how you learn guitar, right?
You do it, right.
So maybe guitar is a bad example. But I think there are lots of fields where the top 1%, they just can't tell you how it's done.
Well, I would actually say that most fields. I would say. I think music is kind of odd because it's like very academic. It's not. I mean, there's physical stuff to it, but it's very thoughty. There's a lot of thought, put into it. I think something like that, something like a performance sport, right? Like basketball or football. There are intuitive movements that people make, and they just make them. They don't think about it. It's like the horse coming out of its mom's womb, right? It just knows how to do it. And if you ask
like,
it,
could you predict, what song is going to be a number one song? Like if you
right?
listen
No,
to 10,000.
absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Right?
I can tell you. Actually, I can tell you which ones wouldn't be. But then there is some small subset of those that you give
like
me that I
Gangnam
say,
Style. Like, how in the heck does that? No, that's terrible.
yeah, I know. It's weird. It's absolutely bizarre. And that's like, there's no way you can actually predict that. But I do think here's how it works. Like, of the top of the top of the top of the top, I would say that the top of the top, the most excellent practitioners of their art are probably bad teachers.
Yeah.
I would say that would be the top, like 0.01%, like the top. And then I would say right below them are good teachers.
Well, I think if you have a hard worker, right, then it might.
Right.
Like,
They're going to be good teachers.
And
then
you're
I
gonna
think
have a lot of people who are like, well, I'm just going to do that. I do it every day. That's what I
Right.
do. It's what I love to do. Like, it's not even work.
Right.
I mean, it might be
Right.
work, but like it's not.
it's not work because you just have
necessarily
fun doing it.
drudgery.
Yeah,
Right,
it's like
and
playing
you-
basketball, or for me playing guitar, right? It's just a blast. I love doing it. It's fun. And
Yeah.
so doing the repetition bit isn't a problem. I'll just do it because I like doing it, right? It'd be like running drills in basketball. Do you love it or do you hate it, right? If you love it and there is just this innate
I'll go
love
and
of
do
it,
like I'll go and
Right.
do them after I'm done playing. Like sometimes
Right.
I'm like, oh, I'm going to go shoot threes for another 20 minutes.
Which that inclination in of itself, it sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You want to learn, you want to get better, and you like doing it. That means you're probably going to be more inclined to be good at it. Me, I would hate running basketball drills. That's why I'm probably horrible at basketball, right? Because I don't want to. I don't want to do it.
You are
But
fully
that's
invited. You may come
but
anytime you
that's
want.
that's why I'm good at guitar because I love running rudiments on guitar. I love
Yeah.
running rudiments on bass, right? And I'll do that as a warm up and as a cool down for every single time I play. And I think that's the case is, are you willing to do the quote unquote hard work and love it? Like writing code. We can expand that to writing code. Do you love writing throwaway code or do you not? Like
I have a
I like
love-hate relationship with code. You know, I like
well, you're also a professional, so you've been doing it so much that,
I love writing it, but I also, there are times where I'm like so frustrated with like the stupid things that I did, or
right, right.
it's like, oh, why is this? This shouldn't be that hard.
Right, right.
Um,
And it's something stumps you and you're like, this is ridiculous. I don't like
well, like
this.
so fun example, right? So I was, we have databases, and so I was doing this thing, and it would be like, okay, I'm gonna go check and see if this thing is over here, and if it's not, I'm gonna go look it up in the database, right?
Right.
And like, so I'm sitting there and I'm loading in all of these things from the database, and I'm like reindexing the whole thing, and it's just like I can see it making progress, but it's slow. I'm
Hmm.
like, why is it so slow? I'm like, oh, let me just try and see if I can just load this into a dictionary in Python. See how
Right.
fast it is. Right?
Immediate.
I mean, it is just like unintuitive how much faster, like me just
Running
loading
that
it
into a
into
dictionary.
RAM,
Right.
doing a Python lookup way faster.
So when you were doing it previously, were you doing a query for each? You were just running a bunch of queries. Is that what slowed it down, or did you?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you read the whole database into RAM, it was infinitely faster than iterating through each query.
Yeah.
Yeah,
100 to 1,000
yeah,
times faster.
yeah, yeah.
And they
And
were
it is
even
unintuitive,
indexed, but like that whole
right?
process of go to the database,
Right?
right? I mean, it took
Yeah.
tenth of a second,
Mm-hmm.
but when you do tenth of a
You know what?
second a
What
billion
that reminds.
times,
What it reminds me of is city driving versus highway driving. Like
3 miles in
loading
the
it.
city versus 3 miles in town
Yes, loading
or
loading
outside.
it because you're stop and go, right? So when you're loading it from the database every time, it's stop go, stop go, stop go. When you just pull the whole freaking database, it's just go. Just set it to cruise control, go as fast as you can, get it in there, call it a day, then access RAM. Like it, and obviously, what's interesting is with the miles per gallon, right? City driving hideous, you know, highway driving much, much, much better. You get way better efficiency
Up
in
to a
that
point.
case. Up to a point. If I'm driving a V10, obviously, there's not a total. But if I'm driving, say, a hybrid, right, that actually maximizes the use of my engine
Well, if you
with
go on 85 versus you go on 55.
right, right, there is an efficiency curve, right? But if you're trying to maximize that efficiency curve, like my wife's Escape gets the best gas mileage at 60 miles an hour. So yes, she drives a lot of people nuts because she drives 60 miles an hour everywhere on the highway. But it's because she can extend her miles per gallon significantly at 60 miles an hour. But again, I mean but it's kind
60
of the same.
miles an
Like,
hour through Midtown Kearney it's
right.
difficult.
And you can't do that. Yep. I mean, she's way better with stoplights than I am. I hit every red. But, if you're talking me versus her, she'll get way more efficiency. But again, it's that stop and go, stop, go, stop, go. And it seems unintuitive because as you're thinking like iteratively of, hey, search through the database, look for this, look for this, look for this, look for this. You're not thinking of the fine grained mechanics of like what you're actually doing until you actually watch it being super slow. And then you're like, okay, I just need to load the
Yeah.
whole stinking thing
Well,
in and call
it's
it.
like, so, what I'm writing is like this indexing of like these medical terms.
Right.
And there's, I think, 14 million
Oh, good
different
grief.
ones. Right. And so,
Woo!
like, you're indexing them and saying, okay, if I type in, cancer, like, what are all the
Right.
things that have cancer in them? And I sat there and I did this. I spent like a year engineering a solution that used a database. And now I'm rewriting it. And it's like, well, RAM is cheap. And that thing took 2 days to A, index, and B, load in the database like
Uh-huh.
afterwards.
Yeah.
So that's 2 days of work. And I can
Versus a year.
spin it up in RAM
Right.
in 30 seconds.
But here's the thing, you had to do that year's work before you could figure out that the
No, I
2 days
shouldn't
of
have.
work.
I clearly
But
should
you
have.
did, you had to though. Clearly you had to. Because and I think so, and I'm
Well, yeah, that's
saying
the
that
learning,
because
right? I grew.
you
My
got
heart
on me
grew one
once.
size.
I'm saying this because you got on me once. You and I were having a conversation, and I was bemoaning how stupid a path in life I took. And like, why did I do this? I made a lot of mistakes, blah, blah, blah. And you were like, but you needed that path to be able to become who you are today.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, dang it.
Wise words. Some man once
Some
said.
man, yeah, told that. And it's the same, like, I think it is with coding. It's the same way. Like, yeah, it took a year to engineer that solution, but you had to take that path to become the coder that you are that
Well, and
found that two-day
that's
solution.
why coding camps are. I
Right.
hate them. Right. Like
Yeah,
I
they're
think
too fast. Yep.
you're not getting the experience of like the failure
Mm-mm.
of like, oh, I did
Mm-hmm.
this.
Yep.
There's like, oh, I did this line wrong, this module wrong,
Right.
this package wrong, this entire website wrong, this set of websites wrong, right? To figure
Right.
out this is the right way.
Right.
Like I think there's so much, and I really struggle with, the JavaScript side because there is so much iteration, and it's like, okay, as head of IT, right, I have to make a decision on like what we're going to use, and I'm like,
Right.
if we go React, right,
Right.
that's what everybody else does,
That's what everybody else is using.
but
It's the
is it
cool thing to
the
do.
right thing?
Right.
I'm
Right.
really like it is in one sense that there's so much code out there that like you can, as I say, you can assemble.
Yeah, you can put it together a lot easier. So you can
You can
solve the
assemble your
problem
thing.
faster just because it's been done before. Right.
Yeah. Is it the right thing? Probably not.
Well, see, to me, the React, the conversation you're having right now is Python, is a perfect example. Okay, everybody and their dog uses Python. Is that the right application for a computationally intense program?
I mean, it's not. So there is a compiler. What is it? C Python? No.
Yeah, you can
No,
you
no, no. There's
can do a
another one.
compilation of it.
PyPy? I think maybe that's it.
Is it PyPy? Yeah,
Where it's a
it compiles Python
yeah.
to an
So
executable.
so it trails behind main, but like
Right.
significant improvements. Have you ever seen the billion? What is it? Billion row search.
The billion row search?
Oh, billion row challenge. I think this is it.
Oh, yes. Billion row challenge in Python. Let's see here.
So I think 1 billion row challenge. What are the fastest times? That's the question.
Gosh, the people doing this stuff are so much smarter than I ever will be. Good night. Yeah,
So
you can do it in PHP. That'd be a blast.
reading a billion rows in 1.5 seconds in
On
Java.
Python?
In Java.
Oh, okay. That's pretty stinking cool, though. They maximize the bytecode on that.
It says
Like,
native binary. So
native. There you go.
those are the top ones. They're all native. I mean, just mad.
So, what was the fastest time in Python?
I think I saw somebody do it. I don't remember. I don't remember. Well, you have to do like a
Billion
lot
things
of
like that.
optimization to get it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Because again, if you're choosing a solution, if it requires, so let's say I'm choosing between Java and Python. Java, I don't have to do a boatload of optimization to get it to go fast. Python, I do.
Oh, but see if you use the C version, I think I mean there's lot clearly there's lots you can run into lots of issues if you do it
Hmm.
in if you do it in Java, I think it you can definitely hurt yourself, right? Like if you
Right.
allocate a row and then
Right.
say system.gc, right? Like
Right.
okay,
To
but
me,
you're getting
okay.
no benefit.
Java versus C.
Well, I
Again,
C
no, no, not
C
really a
should
benefit. I
win.
mean, I love C. Yeah, it should win because it's simpler, right? Technically,
Yeah.
because it's native, quote unquote, right?
Yeah, but it also depends on what system calls you're using.
Hmm.
Like,
How many memory accesses you do? What are you doing with your program, right?
are you keeping all of them?
Right.
Are you not? There's a lot of different ones. So,
Right.
I think there's just a lot of, but it's interesting that you could take a standard Java program and it might take it 5 minutes, but you got these optimized
Right.
versions and they take 1.5 seconds. So
Right.
I think speed is a matter of how much time is it worth for you to put in to get the result
To
that you
get the
want.
optimization, which for you was a year and 2 days, right? Or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And again, now for your application, it's 100% worth it, right? Like the cost that you paid to get that database to go faster is worth it because now your database go fast, right? Like it's much speedier to do your queries and for the
yeah.
user to interact now with your database
Oh, but
because you
see, we
introduced
already solved
the
that problem because we actually
with the
cache
cache,
it on the front end.
right?
So like, it
And those are
actually hardly ever hits the database.
those two optimizations. So adding the cache and then obviously reading the entire database into a dictionary.
Yeah.
Just those are like I hate to say this because you're gonna want to punch me, and I'm glad that I'm far away from you right now. Those are obvious, right? They're obvious things, and that's why
Well,
coding is
but
so
see, here's the thing.
frustrating,
They're not obvious because
right?
you're never gonna understand the scale until you
Right.
actually do it and see what until you measure it, right? So like
Yeah. So, and like I
once you
said, they're
measure it, then
obvious,
you realize, oh,
but they're obvious.
this did
Yes.
not scale
Right.
to you know going from 100 rows to 14 million.
14 million.
It didn't
Correct.
scale the way
It
I
did
thought
not
it was
scale.
going to scale.
Well, it's the classic obvious in hindsight.
Yeah.
Like 2020 is always, or hindsight's always 2020.
2020 is always a pandemic.
2020 is always hindsight. So, and that's the thing, like, and that's where I think we as coders get jaded with ourselves is we see what the mistakes we did in hindsight and we're like, that was stupid. But it's
Yeah.
only stupid if you have that hindsight, right? Like
Yeah.
it's only stupid if you're
And
here now.
also you have to right you have to do it and then be like,
Yes.
"Oh, well now I learned that
Yes.
lesson. Okay, so let me make sure when I'm writing this new
Yeah.
solution that we're doing
That's and that's
better things."
that's something that students struggle with a lot. The whole I'm afraid I won't write the perfect solution the first time. Like to me that's so confusing because the whole it's better to have tried than failed than to not try at all, right? Like there and I feel this way in
Yeah, but I
songwriting.
think that tends to be a thing with this from what I hear, right? Like
Mhm.
people who do really well at high school, right? That a
Yeah.
thing that you have when you go to college is that you don't want to sit there and put yourself all on the line and fail. And
Right.
like I don't care. I've failed so many times it's like not even.
Well, I think if you can't learn to accept failure, coding is not for you.
Yeah.
Like I mean, and that's something that I try to get across to my students.
Every
I'm like,
programmer ever like crosses their fingers when they hit the compile button to say,
yeah,
"Is this going to compile?"
yeah,
Now it's not less of a thing because your
but
ID
yeah,
tells you, but like still, I
right.
remember, when I was at Onyx, we used this thing called GWT Google Web Toolkit to do our website,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and it was like literally a minute to compile, and so
Oh
I
gosh.
would just hit compile and I'd go to the bathroom and be like, okay,
We'll
let's
see
see
what we
if it
got when we get
worked.
back. Yep. Yep. And that's the thing. Like, I actually, okay, so I'm going to say this. I do and I don't. I actually purposely put mistakes in the code that I write with the students. So, we're all sitting in the class and I'm writing code. We're writing it together. I will actually put mistakes in on purpose because they need to be okay. And it's usually Python. They need to be okay seeing the interpreter errors. The red letters need to not scare them. They need to see the red letters. They need to not go, oh no, I'm a failure. They need to go, okay, these red letters are telling me at line 35, this instruction, this error was raised. Okay, so how do I solve that? Well, I go to line 35 and I look
Yeah.
at what's going
Level
on, right?
one is go
Instead
to
of,
line 35. Level two is look at line 35 and
right,
see what line
what's
in
going
three
on?
different
Like what's
files
happening?
away is what
Right,
caused line 35 to not work.
right. And just being cool with it. Like it's totally fine. If something breaks, who cares? And actually having more fun with it than to being like, oh no, I'm such a failure. It's never going to work. Which is a mindset I think a lot of, well, I had that when I was started coding. Like every time I messed up, I'd be like, I'm not cut out for this. And
Yeah.
I think for coding, I think the greater, I'm not a great coder, but the best coders understand you're going to make mistakes. Like it's just the reality of, it's like
Well, and a new
part of it,
thing that I've seen people do is putting inserts in their code. Just
Mm-hmm.
being like, it's the adage from the Cold War: trust but verify.
Trust but verify. Right.
Like, okay, if I know that this is supposed to be a list of whatever, like,
Mm-hmm.
assert it.
Let's check it. Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, if you're afraid to do that, then
Yeah. And to
that's
me,
bad, right?
the way I type is sort of borders on paranoid. I'm like, everything I do, I need to make sure I test it because we make a lot of assumptions about the code that we're writing. Like, again, and you've seen this way more than I've seen this. You have a student that sits down, writes the entire program, and then hits go. And
Yeah.
then they come into you and they're like, this is super broke. And I'm like, okay, well, how many times do you run it? Well, tried to run it once and it didn't work. I'm like, well, okay. Why don't you just go ahead and make a new document and start copying it over one line at a time? Because there may be so many different exceptions that are happening in this, but I don't know because we're just working
Yeah,
backwards.
do one function, test it. Like, does it work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
No.
modular testing. It's so stinking important. Like pull it out and look at it and test it and figure it out. And even then, like you have one function, pull out one line, like figure out what each line is doing and why it's breaking, right? And again, the way that I learned this was so much from John. Use your print statements. It's okay. Like print it out. Like make sure you actually are getting what you want. Like I mean, and maybe that's a bad habit, but that John was my mentor on that one because every time I'd break something, he's like, throw a print statement in there, see what you're doing. I don't know. I don't know what's
Yeah.
going on. I have no idea. So,
I
because I
mean,
didn't have you and
print statement debugging is here, and then like debugger is
yeah,
up here. So.
yeah, I'm still because John was such a non-debugger guy.
Oh, I do not understand why people
Yeah. He was a
like.
non-debugger. And I think he's old school. Like I think that's the case. Like he didn't have the fancy debuggers and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And since he was sort of my protege on that level of things,
Oh, I'm not
I'm
saying I
I'm not
don't do that. I clearly
right.
do that.
Right.
But I think it is also a super useful tool to be
Yep.
like,
Know how
because
to use
if
the
you're
debugger.
trying to figure it out, like you're actually going to take like 5 times as long as opposed to me having a breakpoint at that same spot that does the print.
Right.
Because I can sit there and inspect the 5 levels that you had to put 5 different runs in to print the 5 different things versus me going, oh, I see that that's why this is the way it is.
Well, and I think it's also a matter of proficiency. Like if you're really good at debugging, you go really fast. But here's the thing: there's times when you have to have debuggers. Like if you're trying to do, I don't know, assembly programming. Like if you're not using GDB, I don't know how you're gonna make it work. Like you could. It would
Yeah.
take a lot of effort. But I mean, you're so low down, even a print statement is gonna mess up all your registers. Like you're gonna have
Then
to
you have to
use something.
you have to learn how to load a core dump and then
Right. I mean, there is a point where I mean, in GDB is basically accessing the operating like the system debugger, which I mean, everything does. But like, there are points where you have to use debugging because the print statement itself might actually ruin what it is you're doing. And the The print statement is covering up the error that you're making, right? So there is 100% a
Well,
time for
there's
debugging, and it is
it's
extremely
called a
powerful.
Heisenberg bug, right? Like the bug that disappears when you go to look at it.
Yep, yep. That's exactly it. And the Heisenbugs are always fun, especially in assembly or even in C. Like, because it's like if you observe it, it doesn't show up. It's like taking your car to the mechanic and it's been knocking, and as soon as the mechanic looks at it, they're like, "This thing's running fine and nothing's wrong
Yeah,
with it."
yeah.
You're like, "What the? No, it was just." And then you drive it home and it's doing the same thing, right? Like it's the classic, the Heisenbug. I need to remember that. You never
Oh,
told me the
I
Heisenbug term. I
didn't.
love that term.
Oh
That's a
yeah, I remember
great
with
term,
Onyx we had that, right? So we'd be like,
Heisenbug,
you'd go to look at the thing and like,
and it's not there.
especially if it was a
Right.
timing issue, like
Right.
you wouldn't see it. You'd be like,
Yep.
I can't reproduce that.
Well, and again, if you're doing a print statement, that's going to throw off your timing issues. Of course, it's going to throw off your timing
Well, and
issues.
like I would step through it in a debugger and then see it and be like, I don't know why this is not doing it. And
Right.
clearly it's very notoriously in like multi-threaded programming, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, you forgot to lock this thing, so this other thing is trying to
Yep.
access the same list, and
Again, race conditions, all kinds of crap
yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah. Like, and that's something like in operating, it's so multi-threaded or asynchronous processing and trying to coordinate different processes is that's
Well,
a
and you talk
hard,
about debugging, like
good
then
grief.
you go and try and debug if you're running like a K-State I was running on a cluster, one of my projects.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Right, like how are you
Holy
going to
crap.
debug something that's running on a processor over there when you started it over here? Like,
Right. Are you going to run a debugger on every
oh my
single
gosh.
processor it hits? Yeah. And that's where, I mean, there's a point, especially in multi-threading, there's a point where it's like, it doesn't really scale. Like it's hard to find the problem just because it may be
You
distributed
don't even
across
have
100 different
you may not
machines.
have tools to do it.
You don't even have a
It's,
tool to be able to view that and to be able to see what's going
oh,
on.
yeah.
So anyway, I actually am out of time. So I
Well,
think our
that
doc
sounds good.
talk, I think this was an episode.